Hi everyone, I'm Mike and this is the Sunday Art Show. This week I'm actually going to be showing you how I created a sheep and landscape painting inspired by this view using a mixture of watercolor and acrylic. Now the footage you're seeing here and just saw before, this is from the edge of Dartmoor, and I was actually on my way to an exhibition. This is the finished painting inspired by the view you just showed, but we'll come to that in a bit. So I'm actually here at the venue called the Great Barn, and as you can see, it's a beautiful spot, not a place I'd visited before. Lots of old stone buildings full of character. And I believe they do they hold weddings here and stuff like that. But the reason I'm here is to check out an exhibition. So that right there with those huge doors is the Great Barn itself. There's another shot of like the little archway through to the gardens nearby. So let's go and check out the exhibition. The exhibition is by an artist who's also from Devon, a lady called Catherine Lightfoot. And she, much like me, paints cows and animals and sheep and things like that. Very different style though, as you can see. She uses kind of an impressionist style with big brush strokes, lots and lots of texture in the oil paint that she uses. So that one's simply called Sheep Face. And then I think this one, if I remember correctly, is called Cow Against White Sky. And her paintings are really cool because when you see them in the flesh, they're almost two paintings in one, because up close they look a certain way. And then when you sort of step back 20 or 30 feet, then they kind of, the brush strokes kind of pull together and you get another version of the painting. And so that's a really cool aspect of her work, I feel. Now, I hadn't met Catherine before this exhibition, and I got to chat to her just briefly on the day of this exhibition. And it turned out we've actually exhibited in a couple of the same galleries locally, albeit about 10 years ago. But she was saying that these days she much prefers to just do her own thing and organise the venue herself, which is what she did here. And then this is all her own work. Anyway, so back to the painting I'm going to show you. Before I get going on that, what I'll do is I'll put a link to Catherine's website in the description below this video. So if you do want to check out her artwork, then obviously you can click on that and have a look. But I'm starting out here just with A4 mixed media paper, so I'm working quite small today. This is just kind of an experimental piece. And as you can see, I'm putting in some loose washes for the kind of overcast sky and the distant hills. And my intention is to do the animals and the foreground in acrylic, and then the background landscape in watercolor. My hope being to add a nice sense of depth to the finished picture. And so, as I said, this is the view I'm basically painting, but I'm going to do my own little part of that view, and a view very much inspired by that footage rather than an exact copy. Now, this is one of my favourite techniques in watercolor, just using the tip of the brush into the still damp washes and then letting the two merge to kind of auto-create trees and hedgerows. That's really good fun. Very therapeutic, very kind of meditative, just doing that. Just little dabs with the brush, little brush strokes, and then let the water do its own thing. Now you can see on my initial washes there, certainly on the lower half, I've got a few cauliflowers. In other words, those kind of crinkly edged poolings of paint. Some people don't like those at all. They feel you've gone wrong if you do that. Other people, like to incorporate them in their work. For this particular experiment, I don't mind at all, and in fact, I'll probably cover up most of that stuff in a bit, to be honest with you, with trees and the foreground and stuff. Now I've switched from a blue for the distant hedgerows to kind of a pale purple, purpley brown. And I'm just leaving little gaps in those lines to indicate the openings in the hedgerows that run along the edges of the field. So those are the little access points, the little gateways. And now I'm adding some more, in a more of a neutral brown colour now, some more of the closer hedgerows and trees. And again, just letting the paint do its own thing. So of course with watercolour you can just work so rapidly, it's so expressive. It can be a little difficult to control, but that's part of the joy of working with it, really. Now I decided just to lift off with the paper towel just some of the bottom edges of those distant trees, just to make them a little more even, so that you've got a distinct line to the field, and then the top edge is a little looser. And now, having let that dry somewhat, I'm coming in with a deep green and doing some of the larger trees in the kind of middle to distant foreground. So the background is more or less complete now, the main background. And again, with the paint nice and wet and watery, you can just tease out those lines of paint to create branches. Just let your arm wander and just let the paint do its own thing again. Now, I used this technique last week with the painting of Budleigh, Red Storm at Budleigh, if you remember the coastal scene. So I'm just rolling the brush across the paper to get a nice jagged edge for some of those trees. And it's a nice way to automatically create a random edge. So I'm not painting these particular trees, but you can see looking at those trees there, there's a multitude of colours in autumn in this area. And really I'm just pulling out a couple of those rather than trying to exactly mimic the landscape. And I want to keep most of this watercolour work fairly subdued anyway, because I'll come in a little brighter, a bit heavier with the paint, higher contrast for the foreground and the animals. So as I said, I want this sort of wispiness and this lightness of touch to help the background recede into the distance. And we'll see how that goes, see whether it works or not. So I've gone darker again with my green, my kind of bluey green now, for some even nearer trees. So same technique as before, using the point, then a bit of a roll with the brush, and just alternating between those two. And I felt like I wanted a burst of warmth on the left, so I just put in some thicker Naples yellow there to capture a little bit of the warmth of the fields on the left there. Now I've switched to using a watercolour marker pen, and this is a Payne's Grey. It probably looks almost black on screen, and it is a pretty dark colour as well, but it is actually Payne's Grey. And what I want to do is just pop a couple of the sheep in, just really loose, capturing the major lines and shapes of the animal. I've switched to interactive acrylic now, and with a flat synthetic brush, just going to block in the hillside, the foreground hillside, with a mid-green. Now for the sheep, I'm going to block them in with a mid-tone colour. So this is kind of an orangey yellow ochre that I've mixed up using cadmium yellow deep, a little bit of alizarin crimson, and just a touch of ultramarine blue, and then a healthy dose of white as well. Now I'm working on quite a small scale here, so normally I like to be a little bit freer with the brush, but I'm going to follow my drawing as best I can. I've now just wiped my brush off. I haven't washed it out or anything, just wiped it off, and then I added a really good dollop of the white and mixed that in with a little bit of the yellow ochre that was left on my brush. Alright, so highlights are done. Now we need to add some shadows. Shadows complete, so now we can come in with our darker dark. So this is burnt umber mixed up with a touch of the ultramarine blue, and going to just add that in. Switched to a small round brush just to get a little bit more control. You can do quite fine work with the corner of the flat brush, but it's a little bit more haphazard. Now I'm using pure white here to just include some broken highlights along the edge of the animals. Now it's important to keep those highlights as a broken line, because what we're doing here is painting a textured animal. You know, the fleece is obviously highly textured, so the highlights wouldn't be smooth. They would be broken up little areas of shadow. Right, let's see what this experiment has ended up looking like. I'll just take the tape off here. So there's the finished painting. I'm going to call this one simply On the Hillside, and I didn't get quite the sense of depth I'd hoped for initially, but on the whole I'm happy with the effect of combining the watercolour for the background and the freeness and the looseness and the liveliness with the more controlled approach of the acrylics in the foreground. So it's definitely something I'm going to explore in the future. I definitely want to do it on a larger scale though. So as I said, this was just maybe like 10 inches by 8 inches, so it's quite small. But you know, for now, pretty happy with that one. Okay, hope you enjoyed this little video. As always, please remember to like, comment and subscribe, and I hope to see you next Sunday for the next episode of the Sunday Art Show. Thanks very much for watching.